Welcome to Football's Golden Oldies from the Toll House in Lancaster. Please subscribe and hit the notification button. May 2012, a survey found over 700 million people follow Manchester United. It is questionable how many of these tune into or watch games every week, but one thing is sure, Manchester United are one of the biggest clubs in football. People in every continent of the world could reel off trophy wins from the Busby Babes to Alec Ferguson and the class of '92. Some would be able to tell you about the club's humble beginnings as Newton Heath back in 1878 and argue who were the most important and influential men in United's history, ranging from John Henry Davis, James William Gibson, Sir Matt Busby to Sir Alec Ferguson. And fans will even be familiar with a certain Louis van Gaal, 2014-16, who won the FA Cup in his final game in charge. However, one Louis that some fans may not be aware of even existed is Louis Rocca, who is credited with giving United three great gifts: their name, Matt Busby, and much more importantly, their scouting system. The T-boy who built a colossus, Louis Rocca, born 1882, John Newton Heath, Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Football Club, as a T-boy in the 1890s. Many people have never heard of him. It was Louis Rocca in 1902 who chose the name Manchester United. People suggested Manchester Celtic and Manchester Central, but Rocca thought they sounded too Scottish and too industrial. Rocca set up MUJAC in 1937, Manchester United Junior Athletic Club, and discovered Stan Pearson, Jack Rowley and Johnny Carey. While he was watching Carey play in Dublin, Rocca was so impressed he signed him immediately for £250. He certainly brought Matt Busby to Old Trafford in 1945. He witnessed the first Busby triumph in 1948, but sadly died in 1950. It's a very small world. Louis Rocca was the second son of Luigi, an Italian immigrant from Chiavari, Genoa, who left his hometown for Manchester and became a naturalised British subject, taking the name Louis. Having settled in Manchester around 1872, Louis Rocca Sr. sent for his wife Maria and started a business in the confectionery and ice cream trade to support his family. Louis's eldest son Joseph was to follow along that same path alongside his brother Louis, who also developed a keen interest in the local football team, Newton Heath, Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. And coincidentally, my great-great-grandfather Dominic Canepa came from Chiavari by boat, landed at Liverpool, settled in Coventry, had a child Maria, who married my great-grandfather John Thomas Ainsworth in 1885. They had a child, James Ainsworth, who was my granddad and lived at 3 Cable Street, Lancaster, where he died in 1949. Who was United's unsung hero who served the club for 55 years? Born on September 15, 1882 at 64 Rochdale Road, Manchester, to Louis Sr. and Mary Maria Rocca, formerly Casanelli. Father was a confectioner, making and selling ice cream, gelato, from home. The beginning. In 1894, Newton Heath, pictured in 1892, less than 2 years later, Louis Rocca Jr.'s 55-year affiliation with the club would begin. Harold Riley, the Salford artist, who himself was scouted by Lewis as a youth and a great personal friend of L.S. Lowry, said, "It disturbs me that the present-day club does not look back at its foundations. Rather than concentrating only on current luminaries, Leo Lewis was a major figure in the foundation of the club as it is today, and his Italian roots meant he could flare up when he disagreed with things, but he was a man with considerable humility." Thankfully, Lewis Jr.'s passion was not gelato, it was football, in particular Newton Heath. Lewis's love affair really began in 1894, when he began working as a tea boy at the club at just 12 years old, in somewhat bizarre fashion. Desperate to see a match, but with no way of being able to pay for a ticket, Rocca climbed over the wooden railings at Bank Street football ground. He was immediately stopped by a steward who struck up a deal with the young Rocca. If he was prepared to make the tea and coffee for the players at half-time, he would not be punished. Furthermore, he would be allowed to watch the match. Tea and coffee duty remained a regular thing until Rocca went on to take responsibility for the players' kit and boots, which at the time was a very, very envied position with the club. He later would become the first groundsman the club ever had. As a comparison to modern football, most Premier League clubs employ around 4 full-time members of staff, including a head groundsman, to ensure their pitches are pristine for every game. North Road and Bank Street football grounds. United played at North Road 1878 to 93, and they are the top photographs. Then played at Bank Street 1893 to 1910, lower photo on the right. The middle lower photo is the velodrome plus red plaque which was built on the old Bank Street ground. Bank Street or Bank Lane history. The club had been evicted from their old ground at North Road by the Manchester Deans and Canons, who believed it to be inappropriate for the club to charge an entry fee. So Secretary Alf Albert procured the use of Bank Street in the suburb of Claydon in 1893. By the start of the 1893-94 season, 2 stands had been built, one spanning the full length of the pitch on one side and the other behind the goal at the Bradford end. Newton Heath's first Football League match at Bank Street was against Burnley on September 1st, 1893, when 10,000 people saw Alf Farman score a hat-trick in a 3-2 victory. The remaining stands were completed for the next league game against Nottingham Forest 3 weeks later. At the time, the condition of the Bank Street pitch was well documented and was even called a toxic waste dump. First season ended in relegation. Newton Heath did not fare well in the first season at the new ground, finishing bottom of the 16-team division. During the 1894-95 season, Walsall Town Swifts turned up and lodged an official complaint about the ground with the referee before losing 14-0, unofficially the biggest win in Manchester United history. The Football League ruled in favour of Walsall and ordered a replay, but the result was not much better for the Swiss, this time losing 9-0. Nobody in football held as many positions with a club. Something truly remarkable and almost certainly unique about Rocca is the fact that during his time with the club, he is believed to have held every position possible for the club, including during World War II in friendly games, acting as manager. As he continued to grow both in stature and age at the club, Newton Heath would encounter severe financial difficulties as they entered the 20th century. At this time, Rocca was an active servant of the club, and like the small band of workers at the time, he received no pay. He said, "We tended the ground, did running repairs to the hoardings and club rooms, and did the scouting jobs around local teams. Fundraising events were held over 4 days, and Rocca was leading the efforts, which raised £300, and that was enough to see them through to the next year, when they were saved by a local businessman." More improvements followed. In October 1895, before the visit of Manchester City to Bank Street, the club bought a 2,000 capacity stand from Broughton Rangers Rugby League Club, bad weather restricting the attendance to 12,000. The Manchester Courier reported that a new 25-foot stand was to be added, plus raising the opposite stand 16 feet to allow changing rooms underneath for players, referees and various rooms for meetings, in combination with ever-increasing wages, but all this would send the club into financial turmoil. The club was presented with a winding up order in January 1902, but they were saved at the 11th hour thanks to Rocca by John Henry Davis and 4 other men who invested a total of £2,000, plus Davies paid £500 for a new 1,000-seater stand at Bank Street. Within 4 years, the stadium was deemed worthy to host a match between the Football League and the Scottish Football League in April 1904, won 2-1 by the home team. Newton Heath pulled off a significant coup at the turn of the century by persuading the Manchester Evening News to set up an office at Bank Street to cultivate interest in the club, while the newspaper would benefit from increased sales. Now, at this time, Manchester City had a similar arrangement with the Manchester Evening Chronicle, and it is highly likely Rocca and Davies sold this idea to the Evening News. John Henry Davies saves the club in 1902. It was Lewis Rocca who approached John Henry Davies, who agreed to help save them from bankruptcy. Davies made some changes, including changing the kit colours from green and gold to the now recognisable red and white combination known around the world today. He also proposed that the club should change the name from Newton Heath to something more relevant, as they had moved out of the area 9 years prior, and the name was increasingly unpopular. A new name is decided upon. A meeting was held to decide the new name, with the 19-year-old Rocca in attendance. Legend has it that names such as Manchester Central and Manchester Celtic were suggested by various people. However, they were rejected for sounding too industrial and too Scottish. Nobody was any closer to a new name for the club until the former T-boy made a suggestion that was surprisingly well received. "Why don't we call ourselves Manchester United?" is supposed to be the phrase he used, and as such, Manchester United was born. There has always been some discussion as to what actually went on at this historic meeting, but Harold Riley, the Salford artist, said Rocca was certainly the one to give the club the name of Manchester United. First Man United squad after the name change. We see the team resplendent in their new strip, but sadly not in colour. James West, secretary, J. Taylor and J. Brown, directors, plus J. Wheeler, trainer, are the suited gentlemen, but no sign of Mr. Davis, the sailor. I assume the striped shirts are also red and white for the reserves. The unfortunate player second from the right, front row, is listed as A.N. Other, which must have annoyed him and his family and friends. Another vital role is filled. At the age of just 24, Rocca was appointed Chief Scout and revolutionised the scouting system for Manchester United and for many other clubs throughout the country who would copy his idea. Especially in the north, Rocca built up a network of Roman Catholic priests, schoolmasters and any friends or fans who wished to help Manchester United. Batches of local Saturday evening newspapers were delivered to Rocca's office on a Monday morning, where he would scour reports of local junior games, and if names of youngsters kept surfacing, he would go and scout them himself. Harold Riley recalls, Rocca wrote in longhand, as he did to me, to parents of promising young schoolboys and invited them to come and play with United Juniors. United Juniors were an amateur team set up by Rocca under the name of Manchester United Junior Athletic Club, MUJAC. Rocca also set up an amateur team called New Cross to act as a nursery for the club. An early academy. MUJAC was an early academy similar to ones we know today, that has produced a countless amount of professional footballers. Rocca was continuing to progress through his boyhood club, and it's almost impossible to gauge how popular he was, but I would guess he had made a huge impression with all he came into contact with. Photos are Man United Juniors and Colts in 1944. They seem to be almost the same photograph with a change of strip, one called Juniors, the other Colts. First league title. Following Manchester United's first league title in 1908 and the FA Cup in 1909, it was decided that Bank Street was too restrictive for Davies' ambition, and the club moved to a new stadium 5 miles away in Old Trafford. Bank Street was sold to Manchester Corporation for £5,500 and leased back to the club until the new stadium was ready. The final game at Bank Street was against Spurs on January 22nd, 1910, a 5-0 home win, and a few days after the game, a stand was blown down in a storm. Despite the destruction of the stand, the reserve team continued to use the ground until the expiry of the lease on January 1st, 1912, with the remaining timber being sold to Cayley Brothers for £275. The actual site of the ground serves as a Manchester velodrome with a red plaque attached to the house opposite. From Bank Street, Clayton to Old Trafford, Davies employed stadium architect Archibald Leach, fresh from redeveloping Glasgow Rangers Ibrox Hall. When Archibald Leach died, few in football knew his name, but his impact on those who watched the game was huge. Between 1899 and his death on April 25th, 1939, 40 years, the Scottish architect built stands for Rangers, Chelsea, Fulham, Spurs, Liverpool, Everton, Manchester United, Arsenal, Aston Villa and many, many more. Nothing but the best for John Henry Davies. Bargain of the century. The Football Association was forced to carry out an investigation into the financial activities of Manchester City. They discovered that City had been making additional payments to all their players. 17 players were fined and suspended until January 1907. Manchester City was also forced to sell their players, thanks to Billy Meredith disclosing evidence of the payments when City refused to help him when he was suspended for 12 months. And at an auction at the Queen's Hotel in Manchester, the Man United manager, Ernest Magnol, signed Billy Meredith for only £500. In 1906, John Henry Davies, the chairman of Manchester United, provided the funds for Billy Meredith to set up a sports equipment shop in St Peter's Square, Manchester. FA Cup victory in 1909. Manchester United won the FA Cup 1-0 against Bristol City at Crystal Palace on April 24th, 1909. The attendance was 71,000 with a goal from Sandy Turnbull after 22 minutes. Man of the match was the legendary Billy Meredith, who was to football what W.G. Grace was to cricket. Billy's statistics were 1,568 games, 470 goals, playing from 1894 to 1924. He played in his 48th international at the age of 45 and in an FA Cup semi-final at 49 years 8 months. He has been described as the Lloyd George of Welsh football and the Stanley Matthews and Tom Finney all rolled into one. He was a magnificent player. Meredith, with his pale face, cropped hair, slender frame and spindly leg, was a man apart, a winger of genius, an immortal who always played with a toothpick in his mouth. Billy would die in Manchester a few months after the Munich disaster, after being set up in business by United chairman James William Gibson. Story of the game. 2 weeks earlier, United lost 1-0 to Bristol City at Bank Street. Both teams wore red shirts, so before the final, the FA ordered them to change strips. United chose white shirts with a red V stripe and the red rose of Lancashire on the left breast, while Bristol City wore blue shirts. United made an event of the new kit, hiring music hall star George Roby to present the kit to the players. Inside left Sandy Turnbull had convinced manager Ernest Magnol that he was fit. A shot from Harold House hit the crossbar and fell to Turnbull, who beat goalkeeper Harry Clay to score. I'd heard of him but not a clue who he was. Sir George Edward Wade, CBE, born September 20th, 1869, died November 29th, 1954. Known professionally as George Roby, was an English comedian, singer and actor in musical theatre, who became known as one of the greatest musical performers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. As a comedian, he mixed everyday situations and observations with comic absurdity. Apart from his musical acts, he was a popular Christmas pantomime performer in the English provinces, where he excelled in the Dane roles. He scored notable successes in musical reviews during and after the First World War, particularly with the song If You Were the Only Girl in the World, which he performed with Violet Lorraine in the review The Bing Boys Are Here in 1916. One of his best-known original characters in his 6-decade-long career was the Prime Minister of Meath. Manchester United only attracted top stars. Born in London, Roby came from a middle-class family, and after schooling in England and Germany and a series of office jobs, he made his debut on the London stage at the age of 21 as the straight man to a comic hypnotist. Roby soon developed his own act and appeared at the Oxford Music Hall in 1890, where he earned favourable notices, singing The Simple Pimple. In 1892, he appeared in his first pantomime, Whittington Up to Date, in Brighton, which brought him to a wider audience. More provincial engagements followed in Manchester, Liverpool and Birmingham, and he became a mainstay of the popular Christmas pantomime scene. Roby's music hall act matured in the first decade of the 1900s as he undertook several foreign tours. He starred in the Royal Command performance in 1912 and regularly entertained before aristocracy. He was an avid sportsman, playing cricket and football at a semi-professional level. The And during the First World War, in addition to his performances in reviews, he raised money for many war charities and was appointed a CBE in 1919. An exciting game. During the game, United's left-back, Vince Hayes, was injured and left the field. So manager Magnol reshuffled his team to keep his defence in place. Bristol City's closest opportunity came after a fine passing move left inside right Bob Hardy unmarked in front of goal, only to have his shot turned round the post by the diving Harry Mogger. Hayes did return to the field as a forward, and Charlie Roberts went up to receive the trophy, becoming the first Manchester United player to lift the FA Cup. After the match, the Manchester United mascot, a goat named Billy, drank too much champagne and died of alcoholic poisoning. His head was preserved and hangs on the wall of Manchester United Museum at Old Trafford. You couldn't make that up. Has anyone seen Billy? How popular was Rocca? On the umbrella is the sign Rocca's Brigade, so I think that was a measure of how much the players and everyone at the club thought of it. I mean, that predated the Busby Waves and the Murphy's Marbles of the 50s. Jackie Blanchflower, a survivor of Munich who never played again, was asked about Leo or Lewis in the 1950s and said, "We call him Chief Scout, but in times of distress, he was Manchester United." As with all research, you can often find conflicting stories, and the one I received from the curator of the museum at Old Trafford said it was Danny Blanchflower who said this. I did question this with the curator, as I couldn't see why Danny would even know Lewis Rocca, but maybe we just have to accept it. Old Trafford 1910. As well as saving the club, John Henry Davies would also help finance the move from Bank Street to Old Trafford in 1910, citing the poor conditions were not fit for First Division and FA Cup winners. At a cost of 90,000, about 10 million today, Old Trafford was built and opened in February 1910. As a comparison, Alf Common moved from Sunderland to Middlesbrough for £1,000 in 1905. It was a record transfer. And the house in London on Cannon Street cost £20,000, so the cost of the new ground was huge. United would win the First Division again in 1911, a fitting baptism for Old Trafford. United appoint former referee Herbert Bamler as manager in 1927. After the war, Rocca would serve as assistant to the new manager, Herbert Bamler, in 1927, just as he was gaining a reputation for being the club's fixer. Bamler is pictured in 1914, aged 32, when he became the youngest referee to control the FA Cup final at Crystal Palace, where Burnley beat Liverpool 1-0. He then became manager of Oldham, leaving in 1920 to manage Wigan Borough before moving to Middlesbrough in 1923, where he discovered some outstanding players, including George Campson. He was a kind, knowledgeable man, but United lost 12 successive games in 1930-31 and he resigned. Club secretary Walter Krickmer takes over. Lewis Rocca, near right, continued as assistant manager, but he was also tasked with finding another financial saviour for Manchester United by Walter Krickmer. Rocca duly persuaded local businessman James W. Gibson, far right, to save the club. Gibson invested £2,000 with other investors matching his share, meaning that Rocca was a huge part of saving the club twice. Krickmer and Rocca remained in charge of the first team until 1932, when Scott Duncan was appointed. Rocca and Crittman set an unbeatable record. This was the headlines in my newspaper. It's mind-blowing. In all 4,208 games since 1937, Manchester United will have picked a homegrown player in every matchday squad. I think that's a wonderful achievement. When Lewis Rocca and Walter Crittman formed the Manchester United Junior Athletic Club in 1937 to identify young talent early and save money on transfer fees, they would never believe what they would achieve. So this was in the paper in 2023. A question I would ask is, why has no other club used an identical system to attract talent? Two men immortalised at Old Trafford. James William Gibson and John Henry Davis are immortalised in the Old Trafford tunnel today, as can be seen in the photograph. Walter and Lewis took over the first team in 1937 for a further 2 seasons after Duncan resigned. In November 1937, Rocca scouted a young kid of 17 playing for Bournemouth and persuaded the chairman, James Gibson, to sign him for £3,000. He was the gunner, Jack Rowley, one of only 4 players to score over 200 goals for United, along with Charlton, Law and Rooney. Jack also scored 6 goals for England in 6 games. He's a wonderful buy. Football was suspended during World War II, so Lewis took control of the first team at times and even played in goal, but no records were kept, so I cannot substantiate this. Old Trafford bombed. Records were, however, kept of the night of March 11th, 1941, when Old Trafford was hit by German bombers and left in ruins. It would take a further 8 years to be rebuilt, meaning United had to play their home games at Main Road Stadium. Towards the end of the war, United's board tasked the fixer with finding the right man for the job, and this potentially resulted in Rocca's finest work. Lewis knew immediately the man he was going to target, an old friend. Lewis remembered 1930. Rocca had previously set his sights on luring Manchester City's wing-half Matt Busby to Old Trafford in 1930, when he was transfer listed at just 20 years of age. The transfer was not to be, however, as United could not afford to pay the £150 fee that City asked for. Rocca had remained in touch with Busby throughout the years, as they were both members of the Manchester Catholic Sportsmen's Club. He was determined not to be rejected twice in his pursuit of the Scotsman, though, so he wrote to the then Liverpool player and coach in 1945 to persuade him to take the vacant job at Manchester United. Rocca wrote the letter to Busby's Army Regiment to avoid being intercepted by Liverpool's management, informing him of the job at Old Trafford. The fixer does it again. 37 Cradewell Road, Prestwich, Manchester. December 15th, 1944. Dear Matt, no doubt you will be surprised to get this letter from your old pal Lewis. Well, Matt, I have been trying for the past month to find you, and not knowing your regiment's address, I could not trust a letter going to Liverpool, as what I have to say is so important. I don't know if you have considered what you're going to do when the war is over, but I have a great job for you if you are willing to take it on. Will you get in touch with me at the above address? And when you do, I can explain things to you better, when I know there will be no danger of interception. Now, Matt, I hope this is plain to you. You see, I have not forgotten my old friend, either in my prayers or in your future welfare. I hope your good wife and family are all well, and please God you will soon be home to join their happy circle. wishing you a very happy Christmas and a lucky New Year, with all God's blessing in you and yours. It's a very small world. Louis Rocca was the second son of Luigi, an Italian immigrant from Chiavari, Genoa, who left his hometown for Manchester and became a naturalised British subject, taking the name. I've made a mess of that, Paul. I've gone back to number 5. So I'm just going through it to catch up. So you can take it apart, can you?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
No, that's easy enough. I'll just
Yeah.
start at yeah, how did that shoot back to 5?
I must have pressed something here. Instead of pressing that, I must have pressed another one. Because it's a really interesting story, is this. But if you have any trouble with it, we can always do it again. So as soon as I get up to the letter, I know it's the next slide. Right, so this is the one. So it's really basically from 4 to 35.
Yes, if you go to the next one and then
Yeah, that's it. Now we can start now. The meeting. James Gibson called Rocca into his office to discuss who to appoint as manager, having been recommended 2 ex-footballers, Joe Mercer and Matt Busby. The fixer, Louis Rocca, knew Busby from when he tried to sign him in 1930, so he convinced the chairman he was the right man for the job, and Gibson acquiesced immediately. Busby arrived for the meeting with Gibson and Rocca in February 1945 in his army uniform, with his list of demands. Despite being offered a job by Liverpool, Busby was unhappy with the terms offered by the Merseyside club, as he wanted control of everything. From appointing scouts and coaches to buying and selling players, overseeing training and the team's tactics, Busby demanded unheard of powers that Liverpool were reluctant to offer. Busby signed the contract that same day, and Manchester United had finally got their man. He will build up the team and put it where it belongs, at the top, said both Walter Crickmer and Louis Rocca. The rest, as they say, is history. During the early Busby years, Matt was working with a team comprised almost entirely of players signed by Louis Rocca and his scouting system. In 1948, Rocca had the ultimate honour bestowed upon him, as the FA Cup winning team was almost entirely made up of his signings. 7 of the 11 that started in the FA Cup final victory over Blackpool were products of Rocca's youth academy and scouting system. Rocca considered his greatest achievement to be the signing of Johnny Carey in 1937. Billy Behan, the Dublin-based scout for United, asked Rocca to scout a youngster. Rocca went to Dublin and watched the game, and history was made. John Joseph Carey was signed on the spot for £250. Carey's sheer ability and air of authority caught Rocca's eye, and his progress to the first team rewarded Rocca's judgment. This unfortunately was to be his final success with Manchester United, as he died in 1950 at the age of 67, bringing his 55-year affiliation with the club to an end. He would be spared the pain of Munich and missed out on the glory of the 1968 European Cup route. His successor, Joe Armstrong, would pick up where Rocca left off, finding talents talents such as the 15-year-old Bobby Charlton in 1953. The funeral of a truly great football man. Lewis Rocca is buried in St Joseph Roman Catholic Cemetery, which is in Moston, Manchester. Manchester United players, staff and former players were in attendance at the service. Even in death, Rocca was never far from United, as a piece of the Old Trafford turf was placed on his coffin. It's a confusing letter here. Rocca's grandson Anthony went on to contact Sir Matt Busby for a story about his grandfather Lewis to give to his own father Leo's 80th birthday, and received this rather strange dismissive reply from Busby in February 1990. From my research, Matt Busby was a very close friend of Lewis Rocca, not only at United, but also as members of the Manchester Catholic Sportsmen's Club, and it was Rocca who played a huge part in Busby becoming manager, more than simply the head scout, as Busby said in his reply to Anthony. His final comment, "He was a tremendous help to me in every way," confirms this close association, and yet he could not recall a memory of a man that went back to 1930. Two important influences in his life. Lewis Rocca's most important influence beside Manchester United was his religion. As a devout Roman Catholic, his bedroom walls were decorated with holy pictures, underneath which appeared the photograph of the famous Duck Roebuck, halfback line of Dick Duckworth, Charlie Roberts and Alex Bell. So they took the DUC out of Duckworth and the RO out of Roberts and the BEL out of Bell, part of United's defence when they lifted the FA Cup in 1909. The photograph shows the three heroes of Lewis Rocca, as well as arguably the first superstar of soccer, the wonderful Billy Meredith. I'll be doing a talk on Billy in the future. Going to the match. L.S. Lowry. In 2005, Harold Riley, the Salford artist and a very talented footballer, resisted all Rocca's many attempts to sign him professionally for United. Harold honoured Rocca by creating the Lewis Rocca Trophy, an annual match between Salford and Glasgow boys. Alex Ferguson convinced Nike to provide the kit for the inaugural occasion. 2 games were played, seniors and juniors, with Glasgow winning both games 1-0 and 5-4 respectively, and it was played for a few years, but sadly was not supported enough to continue. Harold Riley, the Salford artist, was the one who got away from United. Summarised Lewis Rocca by saying he gave United 3 great gifts: their name, Matt Busby and the scouting system. It's nothing to do with the great man, Lewis Rocca, but a painting by L.S. Lowry going to the match. I hope you enjoyed the journey back in time to the Victorian age to see a young, passionate man believe in his dream of supporting football at grassroots level, because that was what Newton Heath were. I hope you enjoyed discovering this remarkable servant at Manchester United.